This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Does it ever feel like you're a marketing professional just speaking into the void? But with LinkedIn ads, you can know you're reaching the right decision makers, a network of 130 million of them, in fact. You can even target buyers by job title, industry, company, seniority, skills, and did I say job title? See how you can avoid the void and reach the right buyers with LinkedIn ads. Spend $250 on your first campaign and get a free $250 credit for the next one. Get started at linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply.
Welcome to the Japan on Film podcast. I'm your host, Perry Constantine, and today I am joined by a new guest today, and I just confirmed his name pronunciation, but if I get it wrong again, I'm sorry in advance, and that is Matthew Trecek. Matthew, how you doing today?
Hi, Perry. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing good. Did I get it right?
You did get it right, yes.
Okay, good. All right, good thing. I always have to double check with some of these things, especially working here in Japan. I always get my students' names mispronounced, especially when it's like a student from like Korea or Vietnam or something like that. But anyway, today you are here. We're going to be talking about Tokyo Godfathers, which is basically the same title in both English and Japanese. 2003 animated film from Satoshi Kon. But before we jump too much into that, tell people a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so hi, my name is Matthew Trecek. I am a co-host of the Deskwarmers podcast, which is a relatively newer show that I created with my friend Ike, just about teaching English in Japan. We both went through the JET program, so we're sharing a lot of stories with that. And we also give some tips and tricks to applicants for the JET program, because as you know, with all of these teaching abroad programs, the whole thing is every situation is different. That's what they love to say. But we at the Deskwarmers podcast love to say that many situations are similar. I think it's a little more of a positive outlook on the situations. And it helps to share some of our stories a little better. So that's kind of what I do. Otherwise, that's pretty much me.
Okay. Well, yeah, I was on the JET program. I did the full 5-year term on it, and out in a small town of about 16,000 people. So, ESID, I definitely had those letters drilled into my head. But you're right. Every situation is different, but most situations are similar. There's a lot of crossover and overlap between stuff. As anyone who has ever taught in Japan can attest to. And also, it's there are so many different programs out there, and I pop in on like the subreddits for teaching English in Japan and everything, and people still have lots of questions about what it's like, what it's all about, how to do it, and a lot of the same questions come up time and time again. So I think it's pretty cool that you have a podcast out there that's going to be kind of this evergreen thing that's going to be able to, mostly evergreens. A lot of the advice is evergreen. Yeah. Some of it will change over time. Like I did, I finished up JET over 10 years ago. So, some of the stuff I dealt with is probably not quite the same as what people are dealing with now. I mean, I was still under the old policy where it was the same salary every single year. And then I think in my last 2 years or something, they changed it. But it was only for the new applicants, so I didn't benefit from the higher from the salary increase for the full 5 years. Unfortunately.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's always changing. So when I got there, it was kind of weaning out of the COVID times. So my first year in the JET program, everyone was still wearing masks. They had that kind of mandate, but not mandate, where it was just highly suggested that everyone wear a mask. So that's when I got to Japan, and then I was kind of in the cohort of people who were being weaned out of it. And by the time I left, everything was full and open again. But yeah, we really enjoy, my co-host and I, catching up with members of the program that we were with, and Japanese teachers and people who stayed in Japan. So all sorts of people. And it's just been really good to kind of talk about that again, because it was an important part of my life. And I hope that it can be a space where people can learn more about the program and feel more comfortable in maybe their future job, or if they are a current Jet, kind of feel like they're relating with some people about some things that might happen.
Awesome. So how long were you actually on the program yourself?
I was there for just 2 years.
Just 2 years. And
yeah.
If you feel like sharing, whereabouts were you placed?
Yeah, I was in Kumamoto, kind of in a rural area.
Yeah, I'm in Kagoshima, so very close by. We go up to Kumamoto a few times a year to shop at Costco, actually.
Oh my gosh, that Costco is amazing.
It is, yeah.
I love that place. Yeah, Kumamoto is really great. Such a nice, like, open air, definite countryside. Not a lot of big city vibes like Tokyo or Osaka. But I feel like that's more of the real Japan, or just like more down to earth people. I don't know.
Exactly. No, I feel the same thing. And it's funny. One of my fellow Jet participants, when he was here, he took a trip to Kyoto. And after he came back to Kyoto, I was asking him how it was. And he's like, it felt like an amusement park compared to what I see every day.
Which is incredible. I mean, the amount of tourists and just everything is a landmark or an important destination. Whereas maybe in the countryside, like, you'll have a 300-year-old shrine, which is really cool, but then kind of farmland for miles and miles.
Exactly. Yeah. We took my mom was in town last summer, and we took her to one of those landmarks, like one of the old trees or something like that. And it's just like out in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing else around.
Yeah.
If you don't know how to get to this tree, there's no way you're ever going to find it. Exactly.
A lot of the best parts of Japan kind of necessarily need to be explored by car.
Yeah, absolutely. So have you gotten any feedback from like anyone associated with the Jet program, like program coordinators or, alumni association or anything like that?
Yeah, no feedback from them yet. I mean, our podcast is relatively new. I think we've just released our 13th episode.
Okay.
But we've been in contact with the Jet ALT social organizations back in Kumamoto.
So like the prefectural organizations. Yeah.
All of my old prefectural advisors, we told them about the podcast, and then I made a little something, and there's a quarterly magazine where people submit photos and writings that they do at their time in the Jet program, and they graciously let a spot in their magazine be saved for a Deskwarmers podcast advertisement. So I think I have just a few graces within the program now, hopefully more.
Very cool. Yeah. It's a great program, and anything that gets more information out there about it will definitely be helpful. My son's just joining me on my lap here. Right now he's homesick today, so he wants to play around with my notebook. Hopefully he's not going to tear my notes apart.
Well, welcome.
So what got you interested in Japan in the first place?
Oh, that's a really good question. I mean, it could be like years and years ago, probably just Pokemon. That's that I could draw it all the way back to there, but kind of more in like, I want to shape my life around going and teaching there. I did a lot of Chinese classes in high school and college. And because of that, I got involved with Asian culture clubs while in high school and in college. And then that introduced me to, more like watching anime and watching Japanese movies. And by the time I was ready to graduate college, I was looking to teach English in China. However, this was kind of like a COVID situation, so I wasn't able to actually go over to China. However, the Jet program was still hiring. So that's kind of the reason.
Good. And obviously you were able to get over here. I remember there was some confusion at the time, like whether or not some participants would be able to come in during like the peak of COVID when they weren't allowing new entries.
Oh yeah, they I think shut it all down for about 6 months, and all of people who were trying to come in at that time were delayed, and it just kind of set everything back. So there was a brief moment where there were still teachers in Japan, ALT teachers, and they were just kind of waiting on replacements. So while people were leaving, there were a lot of gaps in the holes of the English kind of education in some of the elementary and middle schools. So it was kind of hard for them to pick that back up after COVID, especially with online learning and things like that. So it was a kind of a rough time for them.
Yeah. I remember. I mean, I was already way out of the JET program by that point, but it was like even I work at universities now, and just like dealing with one of my universities was pretty much all remote for like 3 years, I think, almost 3 years or something. Or at least like the first year or two it was all remote, and then after that they gave us the choice if we wanted to be remote or in person. I stuck with remote as long as they let me, and then eventually they were like, yeah, we're doing it all in person now, so you got to come back in. But the other university I was at, they opened up early in like I think 2021 they started back with in-person learning, but they did not. They had a lot of issues that first year. Like there was one time when I was literally on the way to class. I was like 5 minutes away, and then they called and they said, someone tested positive for COVID. We're canceling all classes today.
Oh,
okay,
no.
All right. I just drove like an hour here. So time to turn around.
Yeah, that'll happen. That sucks.
It was a crazy time. Yeah. So we do talk about Japanese movies here on this show, and you had mentioned a little bit that you obviously you got into through Pokemon initially, but you'd also mentioned that you started watching Japanese movies when you started getting more interested in Asian cultures. So was there anything specific about Japanese movies that first grabbed your attention? Yeah,
so I think initially what I noticed about Japanese movies, and I think Asian film in general, from my perspective, was they, to me, were doing things that I just was not getting from movies made in the United States. And I was introduced to them at a time where that kind of felt more important to me. So, for example, like I know like there's debate around whether, big Marvel movies are considered cinema, right? And I was definitely feeling a little bit tired of that kind of superhero format and a lot of American movies. And when I found Japanese cinema and Chinese cinema, I felt that the movies that I was being introduced to were really kind of down to earth and kind of captured emotions in a way that I wasn't seeing in United States cinema or the movies that were coming out at the time.
Yeah, that's a common thing I've heard from a lot of people too. And I think one of the big things is I think that the movies that get popular from like Asia, that get popular in like the States or in the West in general, they tend to be the stuff that is actually that is very different from what you can get in the States. Like, because they do have a lot of the similar stuff, like a lot of the big movies here, they do have like the rom-coms, they do have like, workplace drama type things, police movies, police procedurals, all that kind of stuff. But there's not really an appetite for those things in America, because the kind of people who would normally watch those kinds of movies are the ones who are going to just watch the American ones anyway. They're not going to, they're the type of people who complain about subtitles because they're like, I don't want to read a movie type of thing. So the kind of mass audiences that you're going to get for those types of movies, there's not really an appetite to see that same thing, but in Japanese or in Chinese or Korean or whatever. And I find that the ones that really end up getting popular overseas are the ones that end up getting popular with people who pay a little bit more attention to film and are more willing to seek things out because they're looking for something different. Like you said, with the, talking about, the superhero stuff, which, full disclosure, I host a superhero movie podcast, so I've got no problem with that myself.
Oh, I'm Perry. I'm
okay.
Sorry.
I
like the movies.
I am all it. Like I've heard every single criticism under the sun. Yeah. So yours is like the mildest of mild criticism. And it's not an unwarranted one either. Like there is a sameness to a lot of this kind of stuff. There is kind of sometimes there is like a conveyor belt mentality. It's the kind of stuff I dig though, so it doesn't bother me as much, but I could see that being an issue with other people. So yeah, you're not wrong with your criticism, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when it comes to these Japanese movies, the ones that have gotten really popular overseas, like for me, when I got interested in them, it was the early 2000s, and at that point it was the J horror craze that was really big.
Yeah.
And that was because American horror movies, like movies in the 90s in America, were actually really solid except for horror. Like horror was like this one really kind of like they'd really kind of like fallen into a hole in horror, and they were just kind of like, there wasn't really any innovation going on. It was just cranking out the same kind of slasher films. You had these rare bits of brightness with like the Scream series or New Nightmare, but for the most part, the 90s was a really kind of like a black hole for horror. And then so when the J horror craze happened, it was a real shot in the arm for the American stuff. And you also had stuff like the kind of like Asia extreme things, like, you know, the 90s has often been called the second golden age of Japanese cinema, because there was a lot of these kind of experimental type stuff. This is when we got directors like Takashi Miike, Kiyoshi Kurosawa, Satoshi Kon, who we're going to be talking about today, and many more that were really kind of coming up in the world, and were really doing some really interesting things with movies that you weren't getting in like American mainstream, either mainstream or even in independent cinema. So the kinds of, it was funny. I remember my first memory of talking to people in Japan about Japanese movies was I was asked by some Japanese person, like, oh, why'd you come to Japan? And I said, well, I like Japanese movies. And they're like, oh, really? What kind of Japanese? And I was listening stuff up, and they just kind of stared at me like I was speaking a different language. And I'm like, oh, and I'm like double checking the pronunciation of that. I'm like, wait, am I pronouncing it right and everything? And they're like, no, I just never heard of that movie.
That's so funny. Like movies like Pulse. I watched that recently. That was incredible movie.
Amazing, yeah.
I have not seen the original Ring.
Oh, it's good. It's really good. It's solid.
Yeah.
Like the American remake is one of the few Japanese horror remakes that's actually very solid. But because they put a lot of effort into basically like translating it for an American audience. But so they're both very specific. Like, in fact, a nice exercise, which is what I did when we covered that here on this show, you know, a few years back, was looking them both together, because you can really kind of see where they chose to take different directions.
Yeah, that's really interesting. How something would work for one culture, but not necessarily work for another. You do have to make those kind of considerations.
Exactly. Yeah. All right. So today we are talking, as I mentioned, about Tokyo Godfathers, which is written and directed by Satoshi Kon, 2003 anime film. And this was actually sort of a remake of the American film Three Godfathers, but which is a Western movie. It's very, very similar kind of idea. He said he was inspired by it, and Three Godfathers itself was based on a novel, I believe, or a novelette.
I had no idea.
Yes, and it was also, and the Three Godfathers itself, it was a 1948 Western film directed by John Ford. John Wayne was starring in it too, which itself was a remake of Hell's Heroes, and which itself was an adaptation of Peter B. Kind's 1913 novelette, The Three Godfathers. So I went down kind of a rabbit hole when I was looking this up, and apparently, like, the Three Godfathers novelette has been adapted several times. Like, it was mostly as Westerns. Like, there was The Sheriff's Baby was the first one, directed by D.W. Griffith, which probably has an overabundance of racism based on him being involved in it. A Three Godfathers version with Harry Carey, who was also then in the 1948 version. Marked Men, from 1919, which also had Harry Carey in it. Action, which is a lost film from 1921. Hell's Heroes, as I mentioned. There's also Hell's Heels, which was an Oswald the Lucky Rabbit short.
Oh my gosh.
There's another Three Godfathers one in 1936. Yeah, then the 1948 one. And then Tokyo Godfathers. And also Ice Age, the animated film from 2002, has apparently a similar plot.
Yes, I was going to say, throughout the entirety of watching this movie, I was just thinking about Ice Age and that Ray Romano mammoth and Sid. Just bringing back so many similarities.
And so I guess this is kind of a very similar story to, or a very similar situation, I should say, to Red Harvest, the Dashiell Hammett novel, which, you know, inspired Yojimbo, which was then remade as A Fistful of Dollars, which also you had Last Man Standing, a Brick, all these other, adaptations where they are similar types of stories. So it seems very similar to that kind of situation where it's just like one of these very old. And one of the nice things about these is, especially because Three Godfathers, the original book, is in the public domain, is you can kind of see how people can take these familiar stories and reinvent them in new and different ways, which is a really cool thing to see.
Honestly, there's that old adage that we've been telling the same stories for millennia, right? And the only thing that's different is the context in which we're telling them. I can definitely see Tokyo Godfathers being in that kind of classic story of just three people having a lot of responsibility thrust upon them, wanting to go different ways about it, trying to resolve the situation, and just having a good story come out of that. I mean, it makes a lot of sense.
Well, even as I started watching it, my first thought was, is this kind of like a remake of Three Men and a Baby? And I looked it up, and it's got like nothing. There's like no mention of Three Men and a Baby in any of the description of it. So obviously, but it's still like the very similar type of idea, right? These three guys, they find a baby, they have to take care of it, and they're kind of thrust into this position of responsibility that they're not prepared for.
Mm-hmm. So that responsibility, and they're just them trying to make good of a bad situation, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what was your history with this film? Have you seen this before? Were you kind of familiar with it going in, or was this your first time looking at it?
So the only two things that I knew about this movie is, one, that everybody was telling me to watch it, and that I knew it was good, or I knew it was at least watchable and people really liked it. And two, I knew that it was a Christmas movie. And it didn't really sound to me like a Christmas movie when I was seeing it on all these top 10 movie lists, things to watch, like Tokyo Godfathers. Like, what is this going to be, some kind of mafia movie? It was on my radar, but I had not even considered watching it until a couple of years ago, right after I got to Japan. One of my friends that I made on the JET program was another teacher. She was having this Christmas party, and we were going through movies to watch, and the group did not end up picking Tokyo Godfathers, but I got a great review from her, and she was like, you need to watch this as soon as possible. So I got access to it, found it, watched it a couple nights later, and was just kind of blown away.
Yeah, this was my first time watching it myself. I'd heard about it a lot over the years. In fact, you're not the first person who's talked about coming on here. A lot of time when I get potential guests contact me, sometimes they'll send me like a list of movies that they're interested in talking about, and this has appeared on more than one list. It's just this is the first time that I think we ended up choosing this one in particular. And one of my best friends, actually, John Brasic, who's been on Superhero Cinephiles before, my other podcast, he loves this movie. I remember him recommending it to me a lot. So it's one of those movies that's always just been kind of on my radar, kind of on my list, and I've never actually sat down and taken a look at it. One of the things that surprised me when I actually did finally get my hands on a copy is the fact that it was written and directed by Satoshi Kon, who I am a huge fan of Satoshi Kon. I mean, I think Perfect Blue is one of the greatest films ever made. It's amazing. We covered that several years back, and we also covered Paprika. Yeah. Like I think it was like last year or 2 years ago, fairly recently, and very sad when I found out that when he had passed, about 15 years ago now, and just very kind of surprised. But yeah, Perfect Blue was one of those movies that just really hit me like a ton of bricks the first time I watched it. And it's one that's, become even more relevant to me the more I've learned about things like idol culture and things like that in Japan. So when I watched Paprika, like, it was good, but it didn't hit me the same way that Perfect Blue did. And I kind of felt the same way watching this. Like, I loved the movie. I'm not gonna, don't get me wrong, it just didn't hit me the same way as Perfect Blue did. And I think I'm now in this space where I don't think anything will ever match up to Perfect Blue.
Yeah, for me too. I loved Perfect Blue, and that's one of the movies where you just have to take 5 minutes to decompress after, to kind of figure out in your head what happened, and then maybe open up a YouTube video to kind of see what was going on there. I think I watched it again maybe a week after watching it the first time, just because I just could not get it out of my head. That's Perfect Blue. But you're right. With Tokyo Godfathers, it's really not that complex or like cerebral. It's not like a lot of his other movies, like you were saying, Paprika and even Paranoia Agent. From what I've heard of it, that's my next one to watch from his. But
yeah, I've also got Millennium Actress, but I haven't watched that yet either.
I have not seen that either, as well. But yeah, I have been. I was blown away, not in the same way that I was blown away for Perfect Blue, but just in the storytelling ability and the narrative that he crafted, and all of these weaving parts of the story that eventually came together at various parts of the movie. It made it such a rewarding watch, because it's like you're putting together a puzzle and you don't even know what the end picture is going to be. You're figuring it out as you go on. And that's what watching this movie is like. Because like when I got to the very end and I saw all the themes come together, not that they come together all at once, but the culmination and like the climax I thought was awesome. And that little part of the very end where you know that they're kind of going to be all right with the bag of lottery tickets. That was just kind of the cherry on top for me. I watched it recently again. I was smiling for like 30 minutes.
Yeah, it's a really good film. And I was really pleasantly surprised how much I enjoyed it, because when I was just thinking about kind of like, I'm not the biggest anime fan to begin with. And when it comes to, and I like, and again, love Perfect Blue, but I was kind of disappointed in Paprika because it wasn't as good as I wanted it to be, or at least I didn't enjoy it as much as I wanted to. And so going into this, I was, especially because you know how it is when you have a movie that everyone is always talking about, and then you go in and you watch it and you're like, that's it. I was kind of worried about that happening too. So I was kind of worried that my expectations had been set too high for this movie. And I was just thinking about the plot, like, three homeless people end up, finding this baby. And I'm just like, I don't know if I'm really into anime take on three men and a baby or whatever it is. So that was kind of like, I was going into this with these kind of prejudices in mind. I'm like, I'm not really sure if I'm going to enjoy this. But man, I had a great time watching it. It was really good. It was, very heartfelt. I totally keyed into the characters. At some points, it's funny. As I'm watching the movie, I was thinking, because you have Hana, the trans character in this, and the entire time, throughout most of the time, I'm thinking, I'm like, this is kind of a stereotypical portrayal of a trans person, which I still kind of stand by to an extent. But then when we get to the trans club that she used to work at, I'm like, okay, now I understand. She was a drag queen performer, so it makes sense why she kind of has those kinds of stereotypical affectations. Still a little problematic, I think, but I can understand it a little bit more. Yeah, especially for the time. Yeah, 2003, definitely. It's definitely far more progressive, even by today's standards in Japan. I think it would be more it's pretty progressive by Japan standards.
Yeah, I wonder what the reaction was at the time for people going to the theater and kind of seeing that portrayal of a trans character in a movie. I'm sure there wasn't a lot of that.
Yeah, there's not a lot of. I've not seen a whole lot of homophobia or transphobia in mainstream Japan. Most people just kind of seem to be like, okay, whatever, just do your own thing type of thing. Like we have it's called Mina no Toire, everyone bathroom here in my universities, where they've got a rainbow T on the door in the shape of a person. And it's like, it's a gender neutral bathroom. I've never heard, and they just popped up, I think, around after COVID is when they first started popping up. I've never once heard a single complaint from anybody about that or anything. I've never seen anything in the English language versions of Japanese media. I've not seen anything about that as a complaint. So, and there have been things, I've seen articles about how there have been some students pushing at schools for more gender neutral uniforms and stuff like that. Yeah. So I haven't seen a whole lot of anti-trans blowback to this kind of stuff. So it just doesn't seem to be a thing that's really. There are also some trans performers, I believe, on like Japanese talents and that kind of thing on Japanese TV.
Yeah. No, you're right. I can't remember the name, but I remember seeing, like, watching daytime Japanese television and just the talk shows, I think there is a trans person who's one of the show hosts.
I think so. Yeah, I believe it's one my wife watches sometimes. I think I've seen her on before. So yeah, or they. I'm not sure what their pronouns are, or if they, because that's the thing too. In Japan, there's not as much focus on pronouns in the Japanese language. No. So there's also that aspect of it too. But yeah, I haven't seen a whole lot of blowback to it, so I can't imagine this being very controversial at the time. I mean, plus you've also had stuff like Ranma Half, which is, I've never seen it, but I understand it's like, it's somewhat trans adjacent type of thing. So I think
Rumiko Takahashi.
Maybe I'm not sure. Like
the author who did that.
I mostly just know it by reputation more than anything else.
Yeah, she also did Inuyasha.
Yes, yeah. I've heard of that. I've never read it or watched it though. But yeah, so I don't think that's as big of an issue here. So can't imagine there would have been much of a reaction to it at all, in one way or the other, really. But anyway, what were some of the things that kind of jumped out to you as you're watching this?
Okay, so as I was watching, I kind of found, like as you were saying earlier about like with the animation and like not really knowing what to expect from an anime about like, oh, this is 3 men and a baby, but anime. I found it initially going into it, I'm like, does this need to be animated? A story like this? And as I was watching, I found so much depth in like the facial characteristics of all the characters and kind of the wild like action sequences. There's not too many action sequences, but there's like enough action moments that draw your eyes towards moving parts and make kind of the need for animation in this story particularly kind of worthy. I think I just felt the characters to be so like you're just drawn into them, especially with their movements and their facial characteristics. But also in their character backgrounds as well. I thought every character to be pretty well thought out, especially because you learn so much about them. And some people are lying, like Jin, I think is his name, Gin or Jin?
Gin, yeah.
Gin. At first he says he was a bicycle racer and that his wife and his child are dead and it's such a sad story, that's why he's homeless. When it actually turns out he just made some bad investments and then kind of left his home and but he was a bicycle salesman, so I guess that part was kind of true. He is in the
not even investments, it was gambling, I believe, wasn't it?
Oh, was it?
I think so, yeah.
It could have been. Because he did he owe money to the guy who owned that club? Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and I want to piggyback on what you said there about both about Gin and also about the choice to do this in animation instead of live action. But we're almost at the break time, so we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be right back.
With a major selection of the looks your kiddos love, starting at just $4 in the Walmart app, a new school year means a stylish new them. Who knew? Find skater skirts and Crocs that say, I'm casual but cool. Sparkly sneakers that say, it's my classroom, you're just learning in it. And preppy polos that say, I'm the teacher's pet, even if they're mommy's menace at home. Find their favorite styles starting at just $4 in the app. The Walmart you thought you knew is now new.
Welcome to Only Murders in the Building,
the official podcast.
Join me, Michael Cyril Creighton, as we go behind the scenes with some of the amazing actors, writers, and crew from season 5.
The audience should never stop suspecting anything.
How can you not be funny crawling around on a coffin? No, that's true.
Catch Only Murders in the Building official podcast, now streaming wherever you get your podcasts. And watch Only Murders in the Building, streaming on Hulu and Hulu on Disney Plus for bundle subscribers. Terms apply.
And now we're back. And one of the things we had started to talk about before the break was the decision to do this in animation. And one of the things that is that you look at when you start to, that you probably know intellectually, but you really start to realize the more you start to watch a lot of live action Japanese movies, is that in Japan, they don't have the same budgets that they have like in the West, especially in America. So like the budgets of most live action Japanese movies, you're talking about Marvel movies before, like those budget which would not even cover like the catering budgets of an MCU movie. So it's like, yeah, like 5 minutes of rendering Thor's cape would cost what most of these movies cost, probably. But so you're looking at much smaller budgets. You're also looking at much more constrained production time. And when you're doing something set in Tokyo, I mean, Tokyo, I don't know how many, if you've been around Tokyo very often during your time here, but it's just such a massive sprawling city, and it's just so packed. And it's just, trying to film there at any sort of length must be a complete logistical nightmare. I can't even imagine.
I cannot imagine. Yeah. Like New York City already has like, okay, you got to spend so much money to close off these streets and things like that. But with Tokyo, there's got to be a lot more paperwork you got to do for that.
Yeah, especially because, there's the old saying, the Japanese didn't invent bureaucracy, they perfected it, which is very true.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
And, so I can't, like the things like the chase scene you were talking about, I can't imagine actually filming that in Tokyo. Like, it's just the logistics of that would be out of this world. Like, I covered the Wolverine movie, the one that was set in Japan, on Superhero Cinephiles fairly recently, and there was some action stuff and some chase stuff in Tokyo, but it was very kind of limited. And it's a superhero movie, it's a Hollywood superhero movie set in Japan, so they probably tossed a lot of money around to get that done.
Oh yeah, and in the Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift, did you know this? They're filming in Tokyo, right? They didn't have the rights to film in Shibuya Crossing, but they just did it anyway.
Oh,
and yeah, this is what I've heard. So I think it may have been either a budget thing, or they couldn't get the documents in time for them to approve it, and they were running on a tight schedule. So they just kind of had everyone hold back, and then the cars are drifting through Shibuya Crossing. And I don't believe that was sanctioned, or at the time, at least, it was, they weren't allowed to do it.
Wow. I can't imagine that would have gone over well.
No.
Yeah. So I can't imagine this kind of stuff being filmed. A movie of this scale with a budget of only $2.4 million. No way would they have been able to make this in Tokyo with the kind of stuff that happens in this.
For sure not.
So that's one of the things is like, a lot of stuff that you would see done in live action in the West, in Japan, if they're not really going to, risk going all out for it, it's just much easier to do it in animation. And Satoshi Kon, of course, he has this background. I think he's only ever done animation. He only ever did animation anyway. So it's very much kind of his wheelhouse there. So yeah, I can understand that part of it, why they chose to do this in animation. And you had mentioned about Gin, and the gambling debts and all that was something, and the fact that each of them is, a runaway in some form. Like, these aren't people who have become homeless necessarily because of economic situations. I mean, in Gin, yes, partially like that, but it's often because of trying to escape something from their past. So in the case of Gin, it was these gambling debts he had. In the case of Hana, it was the fact that she was with this guy and he had died. And I guess like my guess is like she was a performer at this club. This guy, I think Ken was his name, was a customer there. They got together, and then she was able to, he was, wealthy enough that she was able to stop working. But then he died, and because she's trans, right, and gay marriage, same-sex marriage, she's technically, I think, I'm not sure about now, but even especially back then, there wouldn't have been like I don't think she would have been able to change her gender back then. I think now you can, but I don't remember back then in Japan. I'm not as familiar with that, so apologies if I get anything wrong there. But my understanding is that legally speaking, she would have been recognized as a man, and in Japan, even to this day, same-sex marriage is not legal. So even if she was married to this guy Ken, it wouldn't have been considered a legal marriage, and then as such, she wouldn't have been entitled to any sort of pension payments or life insurance or anything like that. So my guess is that's why. And then she just felt so ashamed that she couldn't go back to the club that she went to, that she worked at before. So then she became homeless. And then finally we have Miyuki, who is a runaway girl. Like she ended up stabbing her father, and then she ended up running away from home.
Yeah, her police officer father.
Right. Yeah. So we see these, and there was a podcast that came out fairly recently. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's called Evaporated, Gone with the Gods. And it was...
I have not heard of it.
Okay, so it was hosted by Jake Adelstein, who did Tokyo Vice.
Yeah, for sure. I know him.
And it's a great podcast, and it's all about the idea of people going missing in Japan.
Yes.
And by missing, like disappearing. And like there's the word for it, and like the word for it, I can't remember the exact Japanese word for it, but it's basically translated as evaporated. Mm-hmm. And it's usually because dead is a very common reason why these people will go missing. There are other reasons too, like, family issues or losing your job or something like that. You get ashamed and you leave your family behind or stuff like that. Like there's a lot of that kind of stuff that happens, frequently enough that there's a whole shadow industry built up around this kind of thing. Like there are moving companies that will help you escape in the middle of the night and stuff like that. Also, domestic violence is another common reason why people will take this route. And privacy laws are very strict in Japan. So there's even so once someone goes away and like moves to a different part of the country, it can be very difficult to find them again. So
wow.
In fact, that's one of the main things. I wrote a few books about a private investigator in Japan, and I interviewed a real private investigator here as research. And one of the things I found out, like one of the most common types of cases he deals with, in addition to things like, infidelity, was also cases about missing people, tracking down people that don't want to be found. So there's So yeah, that's the kind of thing that you see a lot here. So I was seeing a lot of stuff. I was reminded a lot of that podcast as I was watching this movie, and especially Ginsory especially was making me think a lot about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And kind of to the point of people becoming homeless in Japan, I really appreciated the way this movie portrayed kind of maybe not the lifestyle, but kind of just shed a little more light on that situation. Because, sometimes, people go to Tokyo, they're going out and seeing all the tourist attractions, things like that. It's like, wow, Japan is so clean. Like, how does it get so clean? I remember thinking that, and then walking into, I think, Shinjuku Station and seeing a homeless encampment kind of on the side of the walls. And my first thought was like, oh, I didn't realize Japan had homeless people, or like, what's going on over here? And you kind of get tuned into this reality that, yes, there are still homeless or people without houses or living on the street, or maybe runaways that live in these communities. And I really appreciated the spotlight that this movie put onto them. Like you see Miyuki, Gin, and Hana living their life, going to the community like shelter and trying to get food by watching the Christmas production of some church nearby. And I just felt really kind of enlightened about how that would look from a Japanese perspective, because of course there's homelessness is a problem across the world, but I had never even thought of what it would be like to be homeless in the most densely populated city in the world.
Yeah, it is definitely something that occurs here. In fact, we had talked about this several episodes back when we covered the movie Weathering with You. So both anime films are dealing with different degrees of homelessness of some kind. Yeah. And one of the things we were talking about there was the idea of runaways and the have you ever heard of the Toyoko Kids phenomenon?
I have not.
Okay, so I'd mentioned this back in the other episode, so listeners, sorry if I'm retreading ground here, but basically it's these marginalized kids in the back alleys around the Shinjuku Toho building. And Toyoko is an abbreviation of next to Shinjuku Toho. So they started calling these runaways like the Toyoko Kids. And they are they're a mix of like permanent runaways, some of them seeking community who have, after being bullied. And it's kind of become like this whole subculture almost there.
Wow. Yeah, that area definitely has a lot of space for people to commune, I guess. A lot of interesting things going on.
Yeah, and after COVID-19, there was a massive increase in the number of teenagers around this area. And and so then this is where the name Toyoku Kids came about. And so yeah, it is something that does happen, and there are different reasons why people become homeless, because, you know, in Japan, the wealth inequality, it's not like in America where wealth inequality is so massively out of control and housing is ridiculously overpriced. Wealth inequality is in Japan, it's like among the lowest in the developed world, I believe, or at least one of the lowest. And it's and the cost of living here relatively cheap in comparison to other countries. Yeah. And like, I mean, it's not like salaries here are also much lower compared in like the low among the lowest in the country. World. Yeah. Well, I mean, to that point, in, you know, I live in Kagoshima, where it's one of the lowest income prefectures compared to the rest. And so the cost of living is pretty low here. But even still, there are a few homeless people I've seen around. So even in a place like this, where you're dealing with, you know, relatively low cost of living, you still do have homeless people around here. And I've never spoken to any of them, so I don't know what their situation is. But my understanding, especially going by this movie, is that the reasons people become homeless is not always related to economics. Sometimes it's related to social issues, to things like shame or family problems or things of that nature. So there are all these other different reasons. I think one of the interesting things about this movie is the fact that none of these people are here because they got fired from their job or anything like that. It is these other reasons, these other societal reasons why they ended up becoming homeless.
So many varied reasons. Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah, like you said, it was probably not their choice to become homeless, or maybe it's just that shame is driving it. I felt that there was kind of an inability for a lot of these characters to connect with people who were not in their same situation. And maybe their identity as kind of a homeless person was contributing to that, like, shame on the fact that they ended up in this situation. And that's also the thing keeping them from reaching out to their loved ones. And of course, in the movie, for the most part, that kind of happens to at least Gin and Miyuki. And I felt, and that's what makes this movie, it made me feel really happy, because I could see these characters grow out of their situation and reconnect with their loved ones. And I felt that was kind of a good message for the Christmas theme.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the situation with I was going to say with Hannah in particular, but with all of them, they basically have this kind of situation where they encounter, you know, their loved one from their past. And we do get a sense that the shame they were feeling was really kind of unwarranted. Right. So we get that when we see, we first get to, like, well, we see it. I can't remember exactly where in the timeline it happens. If it was Miyuki who calls her dad first, or if it's Hana when she goes to the club first. I think it's Miyuki comes first, and she calls her dad, and she doesn't say anything. Right? She's just holding the phone there, and the father he thinks it's her, and he's like, you know, are you okay? Just tell me you're okay, or something like that. And you realize that, you know, and she starts to realize too. I think in that minute, nothing is said, but just like the reaction she has when she starts crying. You start to feel like maybe she realizes, I didn't have to choose this route. Like there's kind of that start of that realization. You also see that when Hana goes back to the club, and she's been talking all about like how, you know, she had been kind of hinting like she can't go back or anything like that. But then we go there and you find out the mama-san of this Angel Tower, she's like, you know what, you're fine. And she's like, it doesn't matter. She's welcome. You find out, she's welcomed in and everything. And you find out that the reason why she felt she had to leave was because she had assaulted this drunk guy. Customer. And and the mama-san's just like, oh, that was nothing. That was no big deal. We take good care of that right away. And so it's this idea that, and also the fact that, you know, Miyuki then finds a message in the newspaper from her father saying that Angel, her cat, has come home. So,
miraculously.
So that's when she makes the phone call. And And then again, you think he's the only one who has nobody left, but then you find out his daughter is the nurse, and you realize that, he lied when he said that they had died. And it's really just because of his shame over the gambling debts that he felt like he wasn't able to go back. And his daughter, she's like, we looked for you. We didn't want you to leave. So you feel like you do realize here that, and I think that's one of the good things this movie does. It shows that, no matter how bad things get, the whole point of family, is that they are supposed to be there for you, even in the worst times. Exactly. And I think that's something that's a really beautiful realization that all three of these characters seem to come to by the end.
I mean, family in our own flesh and blood relatives, but also family in the people that we surround ourselves with and become friends with, and like in the situation of this kind of unlikely trio.
Mm-hmm. Right. And obviously, like, there are cases where that's not the case. So I don't want to, just go say that any situation, your family will always accept you. Obviously, there are people who have very real reasons for leaving behind their families.
Hey, every situation is different, right?
Exactly. There you go. Bringing it back to the JET program. But you do see in these cases that it was not because of something about themselves, like their identity or their sexuality or anything like that. It was just mistakes that they made and they thought were unforgivable, and it turns out they weren't. And they became, and I think part of that is a societal comment here about the nature of shame in Japanese society, where it's, in some ways, it's a good thing. Right. There is kind of this idea of, like, the idea of the collective good and the idea of shame culture promoting kind of like a peaceful existence. There's some truth to that, but there's also a dark side to that. And we do kind of see that in these situations, or in the case of these evaporated people in real life, where they feel like their mistakes are so grave that they can never make up for it. And that's not necessarily the way it works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I remember at the end of the movie, when they're in the hospital and they're recovering, and the real parents of this child, they're wanting to see who it was that actually saved their kid. And I think the police officers are like, oh, they're homeless. And the parents are like, we don't care. We want to make these people our child's godfathers. And I thought that kind of, the realization of such a selfless action kind of breaks down maybe the barriers of shame, societal shame for being homeless, and kind of makes a new relationship possibly to be had between these random couple and these random three strangers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I think because I think, and part of this is the fault of media or politicians or all that, when people look at homeless and they think, these people are like that because of choices they made, because they made the bad choices, and there's something wrong with these people, when that's not often the case. And we see that in the police reaction to it, which, ironically enough, the officer who says that is Miyuki's father, but he doesn't realize that at the time.
Yeah. Crazy. This movie just has so many of those, like, I don't want to say they're coincidences, because they're just written into the story. Just moments like that are so special, where one piece of the puzzle is added at a time. Like, he says that, and then at the end of the movie, it turns out to be her dad. Like, not even 30 seconds later.
Now, as for the coincidence thing, that's actually one of my small nitpicks of this movie. And I get that it's part of, I get that it's part of the conceit you have to buy into with this, but the whole, let's call it Christmas magic, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, Christmas magic.
It for the most part, it was bearable, but when we get to the end with, like, the wind swooping up, I thought we're kind of pushing it here a little bit.
Oh my gosh, that's where I differ. I loved that.
Okay.
I love that. I was fully invested in this being a Christmas movie, and, like, the power of believing in humanity and the hope of goodness for each and every person, embodied in the spiritual wind that blows up and saves a life.
Fair enough. So, see, I'm an atheist, so I'm very kind of like,
well, there you go.
I like instinctively have a reaction to the stuff when we get like overly
like that.
When overly too much divine intervention kind of gives me that kind of reaction to it. So it unless I'm going in expecting it, like if it's something like, you know, a fantasy story or something, I know that going in, then I'm more inclined to go along with it. But something like this where I'm expecting a movie that's much more grounded in the real world.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff, it took me out of the movie when it happened.
Just the random, like, essentially miracles that are happening to these characters, bringing them together, but also setting them on the right path, finding each other in like one of the largest cities in the world. And well, also the note that this movie begins on is them sitting and watching the Christmas chorus presentation just in order to get a meal. And I thought that was kind of a great way to put you into the world of the movie. Like, let's say this is a world where miracles can happen. And it really frames the entire movie from like a Christmas perspective, or like a Christian perspective, at least.
And well, and to your point too, like in the press sheet, Kon writes, this film is an attempt to restore in a healthy way the miracles and coincidences that have been pushed into the other world by the weapons of scientific logic. And
wow. And
just as that sentence says, meaningful coincidences and impossible events happen one after another in this movie. So yeah, there is and he had also, and speaking about the homeless people, Kon also said that homeless people, as the term implies, have no home. But in this film, it's not just people who have lost their homes, but people who have lost their families. And in that sense, this film is a story about recovering lost relationships with families. I think all of that is very true. And we see, and I think the fact that you're setting it in Tokyo is really kind of telling, because Tokyo, and you know, I hate to shit on Tokyo because I do know a lot of great people who live there. I knew a lot of people who love the place, but it's just not my kind of city. I don't really like it.
Yeah.
Tokyo feels very cold to me. And it feels like that. It feels like one of these places where you really do just kind of keep your head down and mind your own business. So
I can feel that. I really like the way that this movie explored a few different communities. Like first of all, the trans cabaret bar that they go to, but also I liked kind of like the Spanish speaking representation. Was that Spanish? Was that Portuguese?
They were speaking Spanish according to the subtitles.
Okay, yeah, I like that because who's it? Miyuki starts trying to speak English, maybe as kind of like a lingua franca third thing, but or maybe she just kind of thinks it's like, oh, gaikoku go, and let me just go with English. I mean, that
actually is a real thing, because just for a quick, not to interrupt you, but there is a quick thing that a story I have about that, because when I was young, my mom's side of the family is Greek, and so when I was younger, I was able to speak Greek, and then as I started going to school, my father, who was from England, they're like, we should probably just speak English now. We don't want him getting confused. So then I ended up forgetting most Greek stuff, but if some few stuff I remember, and also I took Spanish in high school and junior high and elementary school. But then when and it's funny, when I was here in Japan, like every now and then people ask if you speak any other languages. And I said, well, I knew some Greek when I was a kid. I knew some Spanish. It's like, oh, do you remember anything? And I'm like, oh yeah, I remember. And I'm trying to think of a word, and I keep thinking of the Japanese word, because my brain is just like, oh, we're in foreign language mode now. So obviously it's going to be Japanese.
Immediately switches to whatever your most used foreign language is. Right.
I'm sorry, you were saying about that scene too.
Just kind of the different communities, maybe different walks of life, like people in the host club owning people who are like, one daughter's marrying one son, and it kind of felt like a mafia movie. So I guess in that sense, Tokyo Godfathers was a mafia movie. But also the people in the hospital and the housewives that are all coming around when they're asking questions about the house that had burned down, and they're like, I heard this person, like I heard they moved over here, like, oh wait, no, they got divorced, or like, actually no, this happened. So I thought that was kind of funny.
The whole gossip thing,
yeah. So that was a good part of the movie.
Yeah, I and you know, the Yakuza scene was really kind of interesting too, because it showed another side to again, like Yakuza community, right? They did show there is kind of like this community here where the groom jumps in front of his, father-in-law in that to save him, his mafia.
Yeah, during the assassination.
And and one of the things I liked about the Spanish segments were the fact that they didn't translate the subtitles at all. No. Like they just left it there in Spanish. So like even when I had the English subtitles on, it just said Spanish language here or something like that. And they wouldn't say what the translate. And I thought that was such a nice touch because you are really in Miyuki's shoes where just like her, you are just trying to figure out based on gestures, based on, certain types of intonation, all that, what this woman is trying to say to her.
At least from our perspective, like I'm imagining a Spanish person watching this and like going crazy for the representation. Like, yes, I can understand what's going on.
I remember there was not sure if you ever watched the TV show Scrubs, but there was one scene when at the end of an episode, and it was all about this thing where the husband is trying to learn Spanish for his wife. And throughout the entire episode, they're translating it with their English subtitles. But there's this one scene at the end where they start speaking, and right before they start speaking, they said, well, now we can talk about people right in front of them. They won't know what we're saying. And so they have this conversation in Spanish with no subtitles. So I'm just like, damn it, what's it say? So I had to ask a friend who actually spoke Spanish what they were saying there.
It makes you want to know, right? It's like, what are we talking about?
Exactly, yeah.
That's language learning in general.
Yeah, and that was a really nice touch here because you are put in that same position, and it's also nice to show like how these bonds can develop even when you don't have a shared language, and you can still find common ground together. I thought that was also a nice little touch too.
There was one moment at the end of the movie that I guess I'd like to bring up where Miyuki is at the top of the roof, and the woman who has stolen the baby is like walking off the edge, and she's essentially like, okay, this child only gets to have one life, and who are you to try and change the trajectory of where that life is going? So I thought that to be kind of an interesting message because that brings up like things like adoption, but the fact that this woman stole the baby out of the hospital just drastically changed the entire trajectory of this kid's life. And had it not been for the three heroes who came in and tracked down the original parents, or I guess saved the baby and tried to track down the original parents, that kid would have possibly died.
Well, it also has this idea of, that there can be, there's like a silver lining, right? That this idea that even in, some tragedy or some, calamity or something like that, we can still, something good can come of it because it's only the fact that Sachiko steals this baby that allows Miyuki, Gin, and Hana to reunite with their families. Yeah. It's only because of, Sachiko steals this baby that the baby ends up with three godparents that are going to, take care of that the baby ends up coming with these three godparents in the end. So and that goes to the whole, the theme of coincidence thing and all that, like, and now you never know when, something bad can lead to something good.
I would love to see what those other films and other books have done with this story. That is different because I feel like just the themes of, silver linings, that's such an awesome way, especially for a Christmas movie. That's such like a nice, happy movie. Oh, I love it. It's just the power of humanity and power of coincidence and the power of sticking together. It's got me cheesing.
I'm not sure if the others, this kind of stuff is really, it does, like, I haven't seen any of these other versions, but just like my impression from them is it just kind of seems like, fish out of water type thing where you're thrusting this responsibility of a baby on these three guys type of thing. And one of the things that I've noticed about Kon's work is that he does a lot of adaptations, but he only does, it's very, very surface level adaptations. He takes like the very basics of the story he's adapting, but then he just basically does his own thing. So like, I know with Perfect Blue, in fact, we are scheduled, I'm hoping we can get to it this season, to do the live action version of Perfect Blue, which is more closer to the novel. Apparently, Kon just took like the very basic premise of the novel, but then changed everything. Even the character names are different in his version of it. And but also, Paprika
live action. In the live action, is it completely different?
No, in the live action, I believe it's closer. It's closer to the novel. I haven't seen it yet, but that's my understanding of it. And I never read the novel either. But also, Paprika too. That was another adaptation where he had adapted a novel, and from what I understand, he also kind of played a lot of jazz with that. So my guess is when we're looking at, especially because this is not even called an adaptation, like there's no mention. I don't think there was any mention of Three Godfathers at all in the credits. So whereas Perfect Blue, they mention in the credits, I believe that it was based on a novel. This is not mentioned on it, so I think it's just like even more divorced than his adaptations usually are.
I had no idea that he was taking a lot of these stories from other material. I mean, he's doing awesome work with it, but I assumed that most of these were just original stories. In fact, I thought that like with movies like Inception or like Black Swan that draw a lot from Paprika they drew
a lot from those movies. Yeah. Well, I don't know about Inception because I don't know if Nolan has ever commented on it, but I definitely noticed some similarities when I was watching the two.
Yeah, definitely. I think they're there for people who have seen Paprika at least, and then Perfect Blue as well. I think I was always under more of the assumption that people were taking his material, but maybe there's a lot of gray area with inspiration and credit and who comes up with one idea, who comes up with another idea. I mean, that's just art, right?
Yeah. And well, just looking over his stuff, I think Millennium Actress and Paranoia Age, and I think these are original one. These are his original works. But yeah, Perfect Blue, Paprika, and Tokyo Godfathers are based on some existing material that he really kind of twisted around and made his own.
Huh. Well, he did a grand job.
He did absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I can't imagine. From what I've heard, I have heard from people who have like read the original Perfect Blue novel and they've watched the movie. I don't know about Paprika or Three Godfathers, but from what I understand, like it's many people who've like read the novel. They're like, oh no, the Kon movie is much better.
Yeah.
But are there any final things you wanted to mention about this film?
I appreciated how kind of goofy it was. It takes a pretty lighthearted stab at kind of a serious situation, which is maybe what you want to do for a plot that is three homeless people find a baby. Like it would be a very interesting, very dramatic movie, but the fact that it is anime kind of gives you a little more liberty to do somewhat comedic things. Like I wrote down, like at the very end of the movie, the buildings are all dancing along to the song, or which I thought was kind of like a happy note to end on. Or at the very beginning, the opening credits and like the opening credit sequence, you can see some of the Satoshi Kon movies as posters on the video store.
Oh, I didn't even notice that.
Yeah, go back and zoom in. It's kind of funny.
Do that,
it's like his own movies are being advertised in the movies that he's.
Didn't he do something? He did something like that in Paprika as well, didn't he? I think so. I'm remembering. It's it's been like a year since we covered that, but I've got some vague memory in the back of my head of like there was something similar to that he did in Paprika as well.
Yeah, I got to rewatch that.
Yeah, but yeah, I'm with you on the humor. Like I wrote down one of the things that that killed me was when Miyuki realizes that the burnt out house they're staying in is the house from the photograph, and then you have and Gin, he takes the key and he goes to the front door, which is like the only thing still standing. He opens it up, he opens the door and he says Tadaima, I'm home.
This movie was
also
funny.
the ambulance driver, when he crashes the ambulance and he comes out, he's like, somebody call an ambulance.
No,
I'm totally with you. They had these little kind of moments of humor, and also I think that it's funny too, because while the movie is both celebratory of coincidences and miracles, it's also kind of warning, don't buy too much into them as well, because you see that thing with the Sachiko's husband. He's like, oh, but I got this ticket now. So Gin's just kind of like realizing, he's like, that's no, you can't just, keep hoping that something is magically going to come in and Sachiko too. She has this idea that like, look, I have this baby and then everything will magically become better, right? It's this idea of like there aren't any quick fixes there. There are some things. So in a way, the movie kind of argues against itself in some ways.
Well, that's a good point. But I think for those two perspectives, I think the good coincidences are coming to people who are doing good things, and kind of being kind.
Point, yeah.
So maybe it's more about karma than coincidence.
It might be. Yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah. Anyway, Matthew, thanks so much for coming on. This was a great discussion. But why don't you tell people where they can find you?
Such a pleasure. Thank you, Perry. You can find me over at the Deskwarmers podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. And we're also on YouTube with a video format of the same podcast. But I release episodes on Wednesdays at 11 a.m. Eastern time. So you should be able to find me there. I'm on Twitter and Blue Sky and on Instagram now. So if you want more of me and then my co-host, you can find us there.
Okay. Please check out the show notes. We'll have links to that stuff. So you can find Matthew and Deskwarmers very easily. As for us, JapanOnFilm.com is the website, and we are Japan on Film, mostly on Blue Sky, although we do post release announcements on Instagram, Threads, and Facebook, so you can check us out at all those. And we are part of the Film Stories Podcast Network, so please check out the other stuff that is coming up next. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.
The Japan on Film podcast is produced by me, Perry Constantine, in conjunction with the Film Stories Podcast Network. Visit JapanOnFilm.com for show notes, episodes, and information about being a guest yourself. You can also reach out to me on the website's contact form if you have questions or comments about Japanese movies or the show itself. The show is at Japan on Film on Threads, Blue Sky, and Instagram, so please be sure to follow us. If you'd like to support the show, you can donate on JapanOnFilm.com, purchase from our advertisers, or leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Join the Film Stories Podcast Network Discord from the link in the show notes to connect with me and many other cinema fans and podcasters.